Okay, it's live. Yep.
All right. Guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. All right. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. Okay, so inshallah today we're going to be talking about the epistemic value of science versus the epistemic value of the Quran and why the Quran remained timeless and speechless. So this actually came from a class that a few of us actually got to enjoy with Shaheer Hassan. So it was actually an 8-hour long class, so we did that. Inshallah, I'm going to try to keep it down to 30 to 45 minutes. But there's a lot to cover, but I'm hoping to answer any questions in the middle, so just let me know if you have anything you want to talk about. Yeah, it's okay. Technical difficulties.
We got one viewer.
I have one viewer.
Hope the audio's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that viewer left.
Okay, so some quick introduction. What we're going to talk about is what is science, the limitations of science, the philosophy of science, different little parts that make it up, such as naturalism, limitations of empiricism, and then we'll look at God, like how does science break God into word and multi-level layered model. First thing we have to really talk about is why has there been a disconnect between science and the religious world? So if to get a better understanding of that, we have to really look at around like the 12th century, 1200 AD, and even before that. You have to look at Christianity as a religion before the existence of Islam. So Christianity has gone through many reformations, and it's the primary religion practiced by most of the Western world. If you look at their history, religion became something that was meant for people in authority. It was meant for people who were knowledgeable in the Latin vernacular. Meanwhile, the people who were practicing the religion weren't allowed to learn the language of the text. What you had was a lot of people who had power, they had the knowledge of the religious text and were able to implement law. There was no separation of church and state, so all of the legislation was passed through religious legislation. So fast forward, you have this period where there is the main emphasis in science, right? There's a lot of concepts of science that are being regulated by religion. And while you're having the people who are in establishment are the same people who are making the rules for the religion and for the people, you'll have a lot of contradicting statements. So you have people like Galileo proving that the world is heliocentric, not centering around the Earth, and then you have this church figure that has been established to basically put out anything that goes against the beliefs of the church. And the church has modified the beliefs over time because of the degradation of the religion. So eventually it leads to the secularism that happened. People believe that science and religion couldn't coexist. What you had were people who started to learn so they saw the Eastern world and saw the big golden age of Islam. And they saw people who were reading their own texts, who were reading the Quran in its original Arabic, but they were still maintaining this ability to practice science. And it was kind of shocking to them. So there's a lot of reformation in Christianity where people brought the books into the religion of the people. You have people like Martin Luther making changes to religion in order to bring the religion to the rest of the people. And then you're fighting the church because the church is preventing you from using your logic and your thought process and deciding what is correct for you. So what is science? The science is the attempt to discover by the means of observation and reasoning based upon it, particular facts about the world and the laws connecting facts with one another. So when you look at science, it focuses primarily on the physical world. You can only answer questions in terms of natural phenomena and natural processes. So stuff like, what is meaning? Why do things happen? And does the soul exist? These are questions that lie outside of the scientific process. If you follow the methods of testing, you can't really make a hypothesis and see visual results from this from these type of topics. So science aims to explain the world. Science, the collective institution, aims to produce more and more accurate natural explanations of how the natural world works. It uses testable ideas and hypotheses. So you usually expect a specific result. You're usually going in saying these are the possible outcomes. What outcome will come if I do this test? And it relies on evidence. It has to be testable, but it has to be testable by multiple people for it to be relied as factual. But when you look at science, there's many limitations. If you look at it, it's limited to observation. So stuff that we have not yet observed cannot be used as factual evidence to prove things that are in existence right now. Science is also amoral, so it doesn't have any basis of good or evil. It just is. You can't test the personal with science. Everyone sees science, sees an experience or feels things in a different way, and there is no way to standardize that with science. You can't answer why. So basically, you can't go into an infinite loop of why things happen. You can't answer metaphysical questions. Okay, so this quote is from Elliot Sober. He is from he studied the philosophy of science and Rudel is his companion. So he's talking about empiricism. At any moment, scientists are limited by the observation they have at hand. The limitation is that science is forced to restrict its attention to problems that observations can solve. So that's already one limitation. We're only able to look at things. You're only able to test things that we can look at, which makes a lot of problems when a lot of the things in the natural world are things that you can't see. Okay. Religion is, science is also immoral. You can't, okay, so basically, if we look at the natural world, if we were to take bees, for example, so if all of mankind was weird, insane circumstances that bees are, for example, there's hardly a doubt that our unmarried females will kill their brothers and mothers would strive to kill their fertile young, and no one would think about interfering. This is from Charles Darwin. So that just proves how science, you can visualize something that's occurring, and it might not necessarily be the most moral behavior, but it exists in the realm of science. Okay, you can't test the personal. So testing gives way to trusting. So you can't figure out someone's intentions, someone's motives, someone's consciousness. You can't look at these abilities through science, which really creates a lack of trust between two individuals because a lot of human behavior relies on these innate feelings. You also can't answer why. So there's loops that happen. So if you give someone a logical reason for why something is, there's another logical reason for why that thing is. But what you end up getting stuck with is the infinite why. At any point or time, there is going to be a stopping point where you won't have an answer. And if you want to believe in science, you have to be satisfied with not having an answer at the end. But with religion, with God, with belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have that definite end, that all the knowledge, all the wisdom eventually ends at some point, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can't answer metaphysical questions. Okay, so in terms of proving God, right? Science can only stay silent on the matter or suggest some evidence to provide a basis for an inference to God. But you cannot deny God through science. Because how can a method of thinking that relies on observation deny something that which cannot be observed? So let's look at the philosophy of science. The first thing I want to look at is the problem of induction, things like Popper's falsification, empiricism, and not all the science that works is true. And is science the only way in naturalism as a whole? So induction. So inductive arguments uses instances of which can be observed to make conclusions for what we have not observed. So basically, we're using knowledge that we have to figure out knowledge that we don't have. So for instance, if I said all observations of crows have been black, then therefore all crows are black, that would be an example of induction, but you can already see the flaw, because as soon as one person sees a crow that is not black, then my whole belief system is flawed. Okay, and then there's deductive arguments, which are like, if A exists and if B exists, then C has to exist. For example, Okay, if mosques have prayer areas, right, and mosques, Muslims pray in mosques, then ICUC is a mosque. I mean, is a mosque, okay, because it has Muslims in it and because it has a prayer area, right? So those are the type of arguments. Okay, so what people in science use for justification is they use inductive arguments on the assumption that the future will resemble the past, which implies that nature is uniform. So if I was to say the force of gravity has affected all of the unsupported objects that I've observed, and I say nature is uniform, I can come to the conclusion that the force of gravity will affect all objects. But the main issue with this is it's only valid deductively if we say nature is uniform. So when you do that, you can only make the argument using induction because the only way we've seen the world in our finite lives, right, is a nature where some things are relatively uniform no matter where you go. But that doesn't change the fact that, for instance, if you look at the world, we know that gravity works on us at a certain rate. But suppose something happened to change the mass of the Earth, the rate of gravity would also change. So something that we always thought to be true is no longer relevant almost. Okay, so there is a concept called Popper's falsification. So if we look at it, it talks about the problems with induction. And the problem of induction will never be resolved. There will always be limits to observation. So he developed falsification to show which scientific theories were genuine and which were pseudoscience. Falsification states that theories cannot be proven to be true, but they can be proved to be false. So, for example, if a theory claims that something will be observed under certain circumstances and it is not observed, then the theory is proved false. So, for example, the theory of relativity, the theory of evolution, none of them can be proven to be 100% true, but they can be proven to be false once data shows that it is false. Okay, so the limits of empiricism are, it is a theory of knowledge that claims that you can only acquire knowledge about something if it's based on experience. But the problem is our observations will always be finite, so there can always be a possibility, future observations, that deny previous conclusions. And science is reversible, hence it's hard to call anything scientific proof because it's dangerous, because that term gives the idea that everything is written in stone. So that's really a problem in our society because when we look at things, we look at things in a very secular scientific view. However, we shouldn't look at things as permanent. We should think of things as fluid when it comes to science because of the origins of science. Okay, so another thing is not all science that works is completely true. When we look at things, there's usually a limit to how much they can still work and be completely true. For instance, if I'm running a test, I could run that test 100 times, but I could not guarantee that on the 101th time, the result will occur. There's no way to be absolutely certain that the next trial will be exactly like the last. If you look at Newton and his theory of relativity and quantum mechanics, at a certain point in quantum mechanics, so if you look at things at the really small level, like photons and electrons, they don't behave quite accurately when it comes to gravity. If examples of a static universe are also things that are not completely true. To show that the universe in relation to everything is not changing absolutely, like the conservation of energy, conservation of mass, that's only based on what we have observed in our part of the world, in our part of the universe. Okay, so why is the Quran a better way to find the absolute truth? So the reasoning is the Quran uses things like reason, empirical data, self-evident truths, mathematics, logic, introspection, and testimony to figure to get knowledge, to transmit knowledge. Okay, so let's look at testimony, for example. How many of you guys have been to China before? No one. No one here has been to China. No, Chinatown does not count. How do you know that China exists?
Word of mouth. Seen it.
Seen it through videos.
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth.
People that Chinese people. Hey, Chinese people.
Chinese people.
Chinese food.
But how do you know a Chinese person came from China? How do you know if China is real? Okay, so the reason we know China is real is by testimony. And if we look at testimony, a lot of the knowledge that we have is testimony. The birth of our parents is something that we've learned through testimony. None of us can actually prove that our mothers were born because none of us were alive to observe our mother being born. But it's only because your mother tells you that she was born and it exists that you know that she was born. All right. So let's talk about naturalism. So a lot of the way that atheists gain their sense of morality is from naturalism, and there's two separate types. The first is philosophical naturalism. So that's the view that the universe is a closed system, that nothing exists outside the universe. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't affect the universe. If it does happen, it doesn't affect the universe, and all phenomena can be explained physically. But then we look at stuff like recalcitrant fact, the fact that this is a theory. So naturalism is restricted by stuff like consciousness. What is the beginning of the universe? Language, objective morality, and the rationality of the universe in our minds. For example, scientifically, we can prove how a person speaks language or after already learning it, right? So if once you're taught and structurally shown how to read and write and speak, it makes sense how the brain processes it, and there's studies to show. But there are no studies to prove or show how a child gains that ability to originally learn with no basis to build it upon. And language is fairly complex, so it's pretty astounding. The second type of naturalism is methodological naturalism, and that's for anything to qualify as scientific. It cannot ever refer to God's creative activity or any divine activity. Okay, so isn't that an incoherent assumption that everything in the world, it just happens to not need God to start? You know, that's removing a whole bunch of possibilities and therefore limiting science. All right, so, but when you look at the Quran, you look at how multi-leveled and multi-layered it is, right? So the thing about the Quran is the Quran addresses various levels of understanding across time, and the descriptions of the natural world in the Quran seem remarkably timeless. So the thing with any belief system is once you're placed outside of your place of origin, or if you're put in the past or in the future tense, right? You want to make sure that the big conclusions you come across, right, or you make, will always be true no matter what time it is. If you're trying to search for the absolute truth. So in terms of religions that are changing, something that can change is no longer the truth because then it is following a certain place or following a certain time. So what the Quran needed to be is something that is not bound by time or place. And we seek the truth in it because it is timeless. Okay. So as long as you have the ability to read or write the Quran, right, it doesn't really matter what your the level of intellect is. So when we look at certain verses, the depth and contemplation we can get from the Quran doesn't really matter on our intellect. Children can pick up lessons from the Quran, or people can pick up lessons from the Quran. People who've gone to college can pick up lessons from the Quran. People who haven't been educated can go to can learn something from the Quran. And the reason that is the Quran addresses various levels of intellect at various times. It has a whole host of meanings for a particular word that it uses to describe the natural world. The reason that is when you're looking at the Quran, it really tries to use things in the form of signs. It doesn't provide as many details, and it doesn't use terminology that can be interpreted in only one way. So the Quranic verses and ayahs are meant to make you think and reflect, and not to give you details about science. This reflection should facilitate the conclusion that God is wise, powerful, and deserves our worship. There are no scientific miracles. So when you look at the verses of the Quran, right, they're meant to be something that make you contemplate and think and reflect on knowledge you already have within you and come to a conclusion that God is all wise and deserves our worship. It doesn't matter if we're living in the 7th century or if we're living in the 21st century. So the first example is when in the Quran it talks about the orbits. Okay? So the verse goes, وَهُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ اللَّيْلَ وَالنَّهَارَ وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ كُلٌّ فِي فَلَكٍ يَسْبَحُونَ. Okay, so the translation is, and it is He who created the night and the day and the sun and the moon. All heavenly bodies in an orbit are swimming. So when it uses these words, a lot of the words have multiple translations and multiple terminologies. So, for example, if you're looking at it from a 7th century mindset, you might get one message, and from a 21st century, you'll get a different one. So if you look at it, the translation, when the Arabs in the 7th century looked at the natural phenomenon with the naked eye, they were able to see that either the earth is revolving around the sun or that the sun is revolving around the earth. Because we can see the motion, and you don't need any knowledge to understand that. You just have to be able to observe it happening. However, when we look at these verses, right, we are actually looking at it from a very scientific view because we do understand to a degree how the orbitals work. So when we look at it, we can see how the sun orbits the Milky Way and how we orbit the sun. And we can see that the sun is also swimming in the space and it's also orbiting, it's also moving. So if you look at it from an old point of view, you'd see either us moving around the sun moving around us. And if you look at it from our perspective, where we know we revolve around the sun, we can view the sun revolving around a bigger body. It talks about the expansion of the universe. It says, وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا بِأَيْدٍ وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ. It says, and the heaven we constructed with strength, and indeed we are its expander. So if you look at the pattern in these verses, any human being can look at this verse and consider it the truth. The only thing that is to disprove would be to be disproving of the God statement, the we constructed. But that we already proved to be illogical, right? The non-existence of God. Because we can't prove that God doesn't exist, we can only disprove. And since we can't disprove the unseeable, we can't disprove the existence of God. But when you look at the rest of the verse, right, this is all stuff that doesn't matter what time or place we live in, the science that we have will always be able to explain, to a degree, what it's talking about. So what this does is anyone can look at the world, right? So from a 7th century perspective, if you look at Lamusiun, that is the word for expansion, right? But in the old, like it can also be translated as vast. So if you look at the world from no knowledge of the universe, you can look at the sky, you can look at the stars, and understand that the world and heavens are vast. You know, you can see the greatness of it. And then if you look at it from a scientific view, someone who has studied about the expansion and astrology and so on and so forth, they will see, they can actually show you how the universe has expanded in just 1,000 years, in just the last 1,000 years. You can actually visibly see the difference. This is a popular example that I've seen been used a lot of times. It talks about Halaqa, the embryo. It has 5 separate definitions. And all of them can be used in some different view at some different time frame. So anyone who uses it, no matter what translation you choose to interpret, it will click to you. Okay, for example, an embryo is something that clings. It's like clay that sticks to the hand. It's a blood clot. It could mean blood in general sense, and a leech or a worm. So from 7th century understanding, you can easily say that it's something that clings. Because when you look at it, the Galen, 2nd century Greek's position, so we're talking about 200, before 200 AD, had this view. And it could be understood by 7th century Arabs because everyone understands that there's something holding the baby within the womb. It doesn't just float around. Yeah. In the 21st century, we can understand how it literally applies to a leech. Because if you look at the anatomy of a leech and you look at the anatomy of an embryo, they're very closely related, especially in their function, which is filtering blood for nutrients. Okay. If you look at it from a non-scientific point of view, the leech takes whatever it needs to live by sucking the blood of whatever it can latch onto. In this case, it's me. As it sucks my blood, it takes from me all that I need to live. It literally lives off me, and the whole pregnancy is shaped by a similar kind of parasitic relationship. Unlike the leech, the embryo doesn't suck the maternal blood, but does raid her blood for the raw materials it needs to grow. In the world where though, both the leech and the embryo are out for themselves. This is actually from not from the class, but scientifically speaking, a mother's immune system would kill a baby if there was no release of oxytocin. What that hormone does is create a bonding relationship between the mother and her baby. Otherwise, the body would treat the embryo as almost a cancer, that's taking these nutrients away from the host, which is the mother, right? There is no actual beneficial relationship between the embryo and the mother. So it's actually quite remarkable that it still happens. Like we still have kids in that same manner. Okay. So once again, to kind of wrap up, I think it's been 30 minutes, right? 35 minutes. When we look at religion, when we look at the Quran, when we look at it, although we can't disprove or prove God, we can have an understanding of who God is. So we look and we state that God is all-knowing. We know that He's all-seeing. So we have attributes that we know of God. So once we believe in God and know He has these qualities, it's very easy for us to have an ending for a lot of the questions that we cannot prove. Which is a problem with science. You cannot have, there is no ending. You're stuck in this infinite loop and you're almost lost. The purpose is belief in the Quran and in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't take away from science. It only adds to science. But to say that things that are scientific that are in the Quran is a false statement. Because when you look at science in entirety, it is man-made. It is stuff that is very limited and has very structural flaws. But if you choose to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the only thing that you can be possibly missing out on is you're just making the decision is, does He exist, does He not exist? And then you're following everything about it. But once we have, if we establish God as an absolute truth, then the Quran is the absolute truth. And since the Quran is timeless and has no issues, and since it's being preserved through the centuries, we can safely understand who God is from the Quran. And then we believe in Quran by basing Him as our absolute truth. So to conclude, I just wanted to say, I really wish a lot more people came to the class itself. It was very good. There are slides that are available if you want like a deeper understanding. There is a second part to this class. I had to kind of rush through the science portion. There is a whole secondary part that talks about the epistemic value of the Quran and how valuable the Quran is. But I know in terms of dawah, a lot of people like to refer to science as an argument to prove atheists wrong or to prove agnostics wrong. So I hope everyone benefited. If I said anything that was incorrect, it's from the shaitan and not from me, and anything that was good was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Questions, yeah. Any questions?
Good.
I have a few lower as you down to
Okay.
yeah. I guess we
Anything else? Circle here. I think we're good.
sisters. Yeah, sisters.
Do the sisters have any questions?
Alright. Thanks for watching.